Hi, I'm Chris's friend Steve. We like to run hills together. Or I run hills, he watches. But anyway, check this out.
And then within the app, there's simple stuff we help you to communicate on money with. For example, we allow you to comment on transactions. You can say, hey, do you recognize this? This seems like a fraudulent charge or something like that. For other people, they use it for commenting in more of a social way. So, oh, dinner was great last night. Let's make reservations there again.
My wife usually tells me to stop going to Wendy's. Those are the comments I get.
Today's guests on the show are the co-founders of the new financial app for couples called HoneyFi. The co-founders, Sam Shultz and Ramy Serageldin, are coming on the show today to not only talk about what's going on with their app and how couples can start using this together, but also let's talk about couples and money. How do you get your spouse on board? What's going on out there in the world of couples sharing money versus couples separating their finances? Why are they doing it? What are the stats on that? And what should you and shouldn't you be doing? So without further ado, let me bring on the co-founders of the HoneyFi app, Sam Shultz and Ramy Serageldin. Alrighty, on the show today I have Sam Shultz and Ramy Serageldin. I hope I said that right, Ramy. Did I say that right?
You got it right. It took me
good.
6 years, my parents tell me, so you did a great job.
Well, we might have had a few shots at this before we actually hit record. So you guys are the co-founders of a really cool app called HoneyFi that I came across recently. And so I wanted to have you guys on the show to talk about what you guys do, but more importantly, to talk about why you guys are doing what you're doing. So first off, Sam, why don't you just introduce yourself, tell us who you are and kind of where you're at right now, what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder of HoneyFi. We're an app that helps couples manage money together. You can find us on both app stores. And the whole idea is we're trying to help couples communicate and collaborate about money.
Nice. And Ramy, go ahead.
Yep, Ramy, one of Sam's co-founders. Same, we're really trying to help couples stop stressing so much about finances and really enjoy their lives together. And it's a personal mission for all of us. So we're really excited about it.
You know, I love the idea of putting something together that is just for married couples, or not even married couples, but just for couples and money, because one of the biggest pain points that I see, I get emails every single day. One of the number one things I get is I can't get my husband to agree with me on money, or my wife just overspends, or we're on two different pages of money, or we're going through a divorce because she couldn't. It seems like it's nonstop money problems and money fights. Would you guys say that digging into your business, you guys have seen kind of the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we've seen actually is about 60% of couples fight about money on a weekly or monthly basis, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. So it's a real pain point, I think, from agreeing on what they're going to do for a budget, as you said, but even just agreeing to talk about it and coming to terms with the fact that you need to have a conversation about it can often be the biggest pain point before they get started.
For younger couples, it's particularly hard because they're coming into relationships with more debt and they're earning less money than their parents did at the same age. There's less room for error. And so that makes it even more stressful when it's already been stressful in relationships for a long time. So it's also hard because I think those money conversations get pushed off because couples actually get married later than they previously have. So if you think about it, back when a lot of our parents got married, they're 22, 23, don't really have any assets, just combine all of their money and go on from there. Whereas now people are coming into relationships, having worked for a while, think of their money as their own and get married later. So it's a tricky balance to strike between that independence and collaboration.
So Sam, you're saying that people are getting married later. What kind of ages are you seeing as far as that trend where people maybe back, in the 50s and 60s were getting married, 18, 19 years old? What are you guys seeing today?
Yeah, so couples tend to get married more like 28, 29, 30, and they actually move in earlier. So they're in a relationship and trying to manage money together earlier than they previously did. But at the same time, they're actually making the move of getting married later. So it's sort of this strange balance between trying to manage a little money together at first, and then what do we do now that we're actually getting married and we've been told our whole lives you're supposed to just combine finances like our parents do.
Ramy, one of the things that I've noticed, maybe you have too, is this trend of people getting married later. I also feel that, people kind of have started their careers, they've, generated an income, and they've also kind of been independent for those, let's just say those first 8 to 9 years of, of business. And then they're supposed to, take that independency and move into a relationship and combine money. Do you guys notice anything like that? As far as, you have these two career driven people, more women are working in the workplace. We had somebody on our podcast recently that's talking about how more and more women are becoming the breadwinners in their family. So have you guys had any kind of, do you see something like this happening as well?
Absolutely. I think to Sam's point when you mentioned before that you're used to having your money be your money and your partner's money be their money. And they've seen a couple of things. So one, they've seen their parents go through divorce. So for younger generation, about 50% of their parents got divorced, and they've seen the difficulty their parents had trying to separate the funds. The second piece around the women becoming the primary breadwinners is that sense of independence that each person feels they don't want to lose. So that traditional way of merging everything and just going forward from there doesn't necessarily work for them. And then, in fact, this generation is more entrepreneurial than previous generations, in fact, than any generation. So there's more of that independence just inherent in an entrepreneur and wanting to keep what they're building as theirs. And so it makes it significantly harder than before. So we try and come up with ways to help people start to have that conversation and start to have that transparency and think more as a team. We often, we say that a lot as a company. We want you to think more as a team than individuals, and that's not easy to do.
Sam, when I got married to my wife, we've been married I should say this, we've been married 10 years now. So when I first got married to my wife, it was automatic for both of us that we would just merge our money into one giant bucket of money. We didn't realize the majority of our friends at the time were not thinking along those lines. And so I think the only reason why for us it became so automatic is we've talked about it. That's what our parents did. So, we watched our parents just have one bucket of money. So kind of digging into this and learning, over the years inside my own business of, helping people with their money. One of the questions I'll ask is like, well, what did your parents do? And it's almost every single time someone says, my parents had separate checking accounts. That's why they have separate checking accounts. Or what my parents, everything was one, and that's why they have one. Do you guys notice that trend? And if you do, the reason why I bring this up is, is if you have kids, I have children, I want them to, not have any issues with finances when they get older. I want it to just be seamless. For me, I feel like when marriages and money work together, things are seamless. Would you agree?
Yeah. And there's studies to support that basically the more on the same page you are about money, the happier you tend to be as a couple. We do see some couples are influenced by how their parents managed money, but there is somewhat of a shift with millennial couples going from combining finances more to actually 2/3 of millennial couples keep at least some of their finances separate. So there are sort of changing dynamics in how people manage money, and that has its own complications.
It's almost flipped, right, Sam? When we looked at the numbers, it was traditionally 1/3 of couples kept some of their money separate for previous generations, and for millennial generation, it's reversed. 2/3 actually keep money separate. So it's a significant shift.
Yeah, and I think too, Chris, your point, you really want to come up with whatever system works for you. So from my perspective, both systems can work, whether you're completely separate or partially separate or totally combined. But it's just finding the balance that makes the most sense for you. I can tell you, my wife and I, when we got married, we basically just completely combined finances. That was an easy process to set up. We just moved all our money into an account, opened a joint account, and go from there. But it had its own complexities and stressors that made it not perfect for us, because basically what it meant was all of our money is one place. I started handling almost everything with our money. I got kind of frustrated and resentful because I felt like this should be both of us. And of course, I didn't bring it up very quickly and let it simmer. And then, it comes out in fights. And, I think there's a better way to do it. So for us, the balance we found was basically having some of our own spending money and using the joint account for our shared expenses. So that's where most of our spending comes from, but having some money that we get to play with on our own.
That's interesting. And I actually like that idea. I was trying to, as you were talking, I was thinking about how we do it. And I think we do something similar, but if you're going to think about it in a different way, if you don't want to use the word money, think about time. So I know that, we have family time and my wife and I have date nights, but every once in a while, I get a little hall pass, I shouldn't call it a hall pass, right? But I get some time to go have a beer with some buddies and, not have to think about, anything else, just go have fun. And then she, obviously gets her time where she goes, hangs out with all of her girlfriends and complains about us. But the point is, it's like we're not part of that for a reason, because I think you have to have that separation. And so I think that's to a point, right? You don't want to overdo it to the point where, just me personally, I don't think that you should overdo the money where everything is completely separate. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I do think when you are literally completely separate, it does make it difficult, particularly to think about stuff as a team. And there's just practical difficulties with, how do you send in a rent check from two separate accounts, stuff like that. So it does make sense to at least combine some, in my mind, for most couples. But yeah, it's really that balance that you're getting at about independence and working as a team. Because I think, what I found was that it wasn't anything my wife was doing. It was more just wanting that little feeling of independence. Like, oh, if I spend $20 on a couple of beers with friends, I don't have to feel like big brother's watching me and that I have to explain myself. It's just a little bit of space to recognize, hey, we are united. We are a partnership in marriage, but we are separate people still. And, we need to recognize that in some of how we think about time and think about money.
Absolutely. Ramy, I feel like my wife and I've had this conversation very often where it's not everything in life doesn't have to be fair and equal. And I tell our kids that all the time. We have a 7 and a 5-year-old and they say, that's not fair. And I'm like, good. Like, life is not supposed to be fair. And my wife, she'll say to me like, you didn't have to carry 2 kids in your stomach for 9 months and have back pain and throw up, every night for the first 12 weeks. I did. But we get to enjoy the kids together. And so I think to that point is we both work. We have different jobs. She might do something differently. Our incomes could be different. And as soon as we start playing that game of, well, I went to work longer than you did, or I did some more physical labor than you did, and we start comparing who's working harder, who brings home more money. I feel like that's when you run into, a ton of problems. And so I think what goes back to it is like, for example, let's just talk about Sam and Ramy, right? You guys share the business, co-founders of the business. Can you imagine how successful your business would be or not be if you were like, well, Ramy, I actually got up an hour before you. You're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, but I worked a little bit harder than you. So I think that maybe some of this money that's coming into our business should funnel more to me because I'm working harder or vice versa. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope for couples. And I think, speaking from personal experience, my wife and I took the opposite approach relative to Sam and his wife, in the sense that we actually didn't merge any of our finances until it came time for us to buy a house. And it was sort of that moment where we started talking about buying a house, but then we started having the conversation that you were mentioning, where who was paying what and what did we really want to do with our lives from a quality of life and also from a financial perspective. And we realized, because we'd kept everything so separate, that we really weren't working together as effectively as we could have. And there was a lot of underlying tension that had sort of just kind of stayed under the surface until it came to a head. And so I think for couples, it's really important to start to have those conversations as early as possible. We waited until we had 2 kids and a third on the way, right? Way too late. And so we always suggest to people that have that conversation earlier, when it's easier to have that conversation. I don't want to say when the stakes are lower. That's not the right exact way to think about it. But when you can start to evolve how your relationship works together earlier, it's one of probably the biggest mistakes couples don't make. And then to your point around sort of this apportioning who pays for what and who's done what, you've got to figure out a system that works for the two of you, and you've got to try and make it as even as makes sense, in our opinion, because that's going to cause the least amount of stress long term. No one will feel that they're doing more than they should or less than they should, and then that will come up again later in a completely unrelated conversation.
For some couples, that means maybe you put in proportional amounts of income into your joint account. So if you have, let's say, drastically unequal incomes, you may say, okay, let's each put 75% of our income into the joint account if you don't completely combine everything. And that, for some couples, that's a way of keeping it, fair enough. Because to your point, it doesn't have to be perfectly equal. But if you can come up with something where you feel like, okay, this is close enough, and I feel like we're working as a team, that should do the trick.
Okay, so going back to what Ramy said, Ramy, I really like that you shared that you and your wife were not, on the same page, maybe not on the same page, but you guys weren't sharing a bank account. So what did that look like? Maybe because I'm sure there's people listening right now who are like, okay, I don't share money with my husband, or I don't share money with my spouse. and I'm thinking about approaching him, but I don't even know how to go about that. What would you recommend somebody who is maybe, wanting to combine finances, who just doesn't know what to say, how to ask, where to start? Since you have gone through that process, Ramy, what would you recommend?
Sure. So I think it's about, it obviously depends on where you are in your relationship. Are you earlier in the relationship? You've maybe moved in together, or are you further along, you're married and you might have some kids? I think it changes the conversation. But you always have to start with, well, what is it that we consider joint, and what is it that we consider that we should be merging that kind of makes sense? And you start with the easy things like rent and utilities and groceries, and then you work your way up to other things that are a little more on the discretionary side. So joint travel, kids expenses, things like that. Not kids expenses, obviously not discretionary, but and then your personal expenses. I think it's a matter of starting to merge more and more and to think about it more and more as a unit until you don't feel comfortable with it. And for some couples, that means going all the way together, and that's great. And for other couples, it means household expenses, and we kind of stop there. There's no right way or wrong way, I don't think. And then as far as tools, we built HoneyFi to kind of help you on that journey, right? That's part of why we started HoneyFi on my end, was for my wife and I to see our finances in one place, where because we had everything separate, we had no visibility into each other's finances and what we were spending on everything. And I think it's just a matter of having that conversation, being open with each other, and working your way up to the point where you feel comfortable.
I think it's okay to say, and I've actually said this out loud to some of our students that had the same questions. I'll ask them just point blank, do you guys share a bed? I'm like, kind of laugh. Like, of course we do. I'm like, okay. Do you guys share the kids, or do you get one of you gets one, the other one gets the other one? They're like, no, we share kids. I'm like, it's crazy to me that, we can share a bed, we can share kids, but then when it comes to the bank account, it's like, whoa, no, are you out of your mind? That's crazy, right? And we're like, well, we share a bed every night, right? I mean, we share a bed, we should be able to share a bank account. So this kind of leads me into, why HoneyFi? I mean, first of all, I love the name because it makes sense, but why did you guys decide to officially start HoneyFi? Like, I get the point of, look, we're going to create an app for my wife and I to be on the same page, but why launch this to everyone?
We recognized pretty early on, I think that's kind of how Joe, Sam, and I got together, is that we weren't alone, right? So we'd each faced similar but different challenges managing money with our partners. It's one of those things where we said, look, if we can build something that helps solve all problems, then we can definitely help other people. And as we started doing more research and we started understanding a bit more about the needs that people have, we recognized that this was a really big opportunity, not just from a company perspective, but a really big opportunity to help people, and that no one had really focused on it before. The second piece was our background. So we've all worked at banks or worked for financial services companies or advised them. So we felt that we were able to bring some of that experience to really help accelerate the process of building HoneyFi and getting it out to people. And selfishly, I always joke to people, I just wanted to save my marriage. If we help other people, awesome. But Sam, I don't know if you want to add to that. But
yeah, I mean, I think it was first and foremost about helping people and really trying to help people avoid similar mistakes that we made. A lot of it was pushing off conversations we should have had. For me and my wife, I remember after we had completely merged our finances and we were talking to a financial advisor for the first time, he was asking us really basic questions around like, what are the 2 or 3 big financial goals for you the next 3 years? And we just started laughing because we didn't know, and we didn't know what the other person would say. And we felt kind of ridiculous. But I don't think we're alone in that, because they're easy conversations to push off. And it's not rocket science. But starting those conversations as early as you can, I think will really help couples avoid some of the pitfalls we found ourselves in.
So let's go through the process of HoneyFi. So people are listening, like, yeah, I've heard the term HoneyFi a bunch. It makes sense. Honey finance, HoneyFi. We're talking about marriage and money. So I'm guessing this app, has something to do with marriage and money, combining finances, being on the same page as finances. But just walk me through it. So let's just say we'll have links in the show notes. You know what? We'll just make it easy. It's moneypeach.com/HoneyFi. So we'll have links in the show notes. If they click on that link, what's going to happen next?
Once you open the app, you'll link your accounts similar to how you would for something like Mint or You Need a Budget. The difference is once you link those accounts, we'll actually ask you, are these joint accounts? Are they individual? And if they're individual, you can decide how much you want to share with your partner. So do you want to share your balances? Do you want to share your transactions? And then from there, we've sort of designed the whole experience to simplify things for you and automate as much as we can to do the heavy lifting, and then let you guys try to get on the same page and make sure, what needs to get done with your finances gets done. So for example, we automatically calculate and suggest a household budget for you based on your previous spending. That's a process that a lot of couples don't like to go through. It's kind of a pain. So we try to make that simpler so you guys can sort of lay some of the ground rules like, okay, we're going to spend $500 on groceries this month. That can sort of minimize some of the miscommunications that come up when you haven't talked about it before. And the first time you're talking about it is when you realize, oh, we've spent $1,000 on groceries this month. And then within the app, there's simple stuff we push you and help you to communicate on money with. So for example, we allow you to comment on transactions. So if you see a charge come through that's for something you don't recognize, you can say, hey, do you recognize this? This seems like a fraudulent charge or something like that. For other people, they use it for commenting in more of a social way. So, oh, dinner was great last night. Let's make reservations there again. It's however you want to do it, but the whole idea is getting you to start some of those conversations and get a little more in sync about money.
My wife usually tells me to stop going to Wendy's. Those are the comments I get.
Hey guys, Chris Peach here. Hey, did you know Andrew and I were once living paycheck to paycheck and we had racked up $52,000 in consumer debt in only 4 years of marriage? Yeah, we were normal until we hit rock bottom. You see, since that moment, we decided to stop borrowing money, stop using credit cards, pay with cash, and then we did the unthinkable and we paid off $52,000 in only 7 months. Sounds crazy, right? Well, maybe not as crazy as working nonstop to send all of our money to the bank in the form of payments. Here's the deal. I'm hosting a free workshop where I share our story and I show you the same step-by-step method to going from broke to debt-free and then on to building wealth. So head on over to moneypeach.com/workshop to grab your spot in this free online training that I promise you are going to absolutely love. Once again, that's moneypeach.com/workshop. My wife and I have the app. We've been testing it out, and you can make a comment that says, you can make a comment that says anything, So if I'm out with my buddy John and she sees it comes across as like $32, she'll say something like, wow, how many beers did you have? I'm like, easy. We had burgers, or, easy, So, but I do like that because when she goes out with her friends, right, and she spends money, we have it so you can see everything. But it allows me to just feel like I'm part of that. Even though, she's doing her own thing, at least that I'm part of that. The money that we're sharing, right? Now I kind of see what it's going to, or when. Well, here's another one. Here's one that was important. So at the time of recording this, it's right before Christmas. And so, you see a bunch of stuff that comes in, Christmas spending. And so looking at that, two things happened. One is I realized, wow, thank God we save up enough money for Christmas because it's expensive. But two is that's work that she's doing for she's doing for the kids and for the family and for the, everybody else that we're going to share Christmas with. And it's something that I'm not doing. And when I actually see like what she's going out and doing in our app, I'm like, you know what? Thank you. Thank you for going out and doing that because I can't stand Christmas shopping. It's the worst thing. I think every guy, it's the worst thing ever. But I thought that was pretty cool too, that social kind of grouping that you have there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I think there are other benefits too. So I'll tell you from my experience, I typically pay the bills in the sense that I manage the bill paying, meaning I, make sure that each bill gets paid and so on. And my wife didn't necessarily have visibility to that because she wasn't involved in that process. And a lot of it's auto pay and things like that. And so as we started to show our recurring bills and what we were paying for each, she said, really? Do we pay that much for, in this case, it was the electric bill? And I said, yeah. And she said, is that why you're always walking around turning off the lights? And I said, yeah. And so I think it's part of that it's creating that transparency with each other about what's going on from an effort perspective, as you said, but also just to get people on the same page as to why you're approaching things the way you do. Because we've actually found within a relationship, there's typically one person who's much more involved in the day-to-day finances, the bills and the groceries and that kind of stuff. We call them the house CFO. And they're typically trying to pull the other person along and say, hey, this is what we're doing great, or we need to watch our spending here. And so we've tried to really help that person, this house CFO, engage their partner with the ability to share charts and graphs and things like that. And we've seen that that's been really helpful as well.
Sam, one of the things that I noticed with HoneyFi is it causes the husband and the wife or whoever in the relationship, it causes them to actually, start talking about money. And the reason why is I think so many people that so many people that I meet with will open up their budget and we'll go through and we'll say, how much do you think you spent at Target last month? And they're like, oh, I don't even want to look at it. I don't look at it because it scares me, right? That's kind of like their number one thing is I don't ever look at it. Well, guess who is looking at it? Your spouse. Your spouse is looking at your spending, but you get to look at your spouse spending. So it's kind of like that whole thing is we don't like to look at what we are afraid to look at because it's our mess, but we have no problem looking at somebody else's and critiquing. And I think that is the level of accountability that you get. And it's very simple and easy to see inside the app is not to point fingers, but just to keep that dialogue open.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a certain amount of accountability it brings, which is interesting. I mean, with my wife and I can say that when I'd see a purchase come in from my wife, it would almost count as double in my brain because I'd say, oh, why do you need to buy that gadget? Or why do you need to buy something that doesn't sort of strike my fancy? But when we actually crunch the numbers and I could see because you can tag transactions to a person, I would see actually she spends basically the same as I do. It's just the purchases that I make are more important to me and make more sense to me. And so there's a certain amount of honesty and accountability I think it brings because it certainly made me more self-aware and also in a healthy way, less critical of my wife's spending because she wasn't spending out of control. It's just her purchases matter more to her and less to me, and that's okay.
Very cool. So Sam and Ramy, we can get HoneyFi both in the Apple Store and for Android in the Google Play Store?
Correct.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, very cool. The second question I have is, what's the security like? Because if I'm linking my bank account to it, what kind of guaranteed security do we have with that?
Security is very important to us. And as I mentioned before, we come from a background in banking. And so we brought a lot of those best practices in, specifically around the linking of your accounts. We've partnered with a company called Plaid. Plaid is actually partially owned by companies like American Express and Chase. So you can be confident that they're properly doing what they need to do. They are actually the ones who get your username and password and make the connections to the other banks. So we actually, as HoneyFi, don't store any of that information. And that, for us, of course, helps manage some of the risk. And then we also don't have any ability to move money or change anything. We're simply just getting access to your transactions and accounts. And that way you don't have to manually type in all those things you're buying and the amounts and so on. So we worked really hard to make sure that the experience is as secure as it can be.
So a lot of the apps out there, if you're wondering, I'm very familiar with Plaid. Many of the people who've been on the podcast that have, an app in the financial industry, some kind of fintech app, they all use Plaid. I think we've talked about it before. And we actually had a guest come on the show talk about how they went to Plaid's building. I mean, they were only allowed to get 3 feet in the building. And then it's as crazy as a retinal scan. And I mean, their security is so off the wall crazy. I think it has to be. So that's cool that you guys don't have to worry about that because they're kind of handling that all in house for you. And you're basically just getting, an image of what's going on inside the account, not actually access to the account, correct?
Correct. Yep, that's a good way of describing it.
All right, very cool. So next question I have is, what is the cost? I mean, what is the cost of HoneyFi?
HoneyFi is free for users. We want to make sure it's available to as many people as possible. So no cost.
If HoneyFi is free, how are you guys making any money?
We help customers connect with partners. And when we do that, we collect a referral fee. So the difference between us and, let's say, some of the other apps out there is we're not trying to hit you with 10 ads for a credit card you don't need. We're really trying to come in places where you need help. Let's say you're moving in together and have some things you need to save for there, or you are having a kid and want to start saving in a 529. We can help refer you to a partner when we think it's actually valuable to you. And then when we make that connection, we'll collect a fee from the partner, not you.
I think it's a really solid model because your goal there is we're just going to connect you with the right user and let you decide or not the right user, the right service, and let you decide if that's good for you. I mean, that's how Groupon started, right? Groupon doesn't charge a monthly fee. Groupon just says, here's some recommendations that line up with what you want, saves you money, and they get that referral commission. So is that kind of the model you guys have too, is just basically you're referring somebody to their product or service that lines up with what you see they could benefit from, correct?
Exactly.
Right. And I think the one thing I'd add too is that we're not selling your information to these partners. We're actually presenting those partners to you, and it's up to you to decide to take a look and to potentially use their product. So, we just want to make sure people understand that when they sign up, it's completely secure and we're not sending we're selling your information anywhere.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's huge with me. So, it is a little slimy, I think, when, you can definitely generate income by taking your users and selling a list to companies that could solicit to them, blind solicit to them. The fact that you're not doing that, it shows integrity because you're passing up on, some definite income or definite revenue right there. But I also think it's not good for the user, right? The reason why we're using an app like HoneyFi is because we want to be better with our money. We don't want to be solicited by 1,000 blind offers, that doesn't even sometimes make sense because people just purchase it off a list. I would much rather have the model you have. And this is the same model that we use too, is we don't ever send our information out to anybody else. What we do is we send our users information to them to see, would this be something that you would like? And if you are, here's how to get in contact with them. Kind of basically same thing with HoneyFi. This is like we're having you on the show here to talk about HoneyFi, why it's a good thing. And then if the listener wants to go to HoneyFi and check them out, they can, but there's no way that, you're going to be blind offering them like, hey, come check us out. Does that make sense? Is that right? Did I say that right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like you, we're trying to make sure that we build the trust with our customers. And we think that's an easy way to lose trust is if all of a sudden they sign up for HoneyFi and they get emails and pings from random companies, right? So, yeah. I think
the way we think about it is we want to have your data and use that to empower you to make better decisions. We're not trying to give your data to someone else and empower them to make more money.
No, and I don't think there's anybody listening to this here that's thinking, they have an app that, is a business that generates income. I think that anybody out there that's creating an app or creating a business or starting a business, there is the goal of generating revenue. This is what we do for a living. And I don't think anybody's upset with that. But the reason why I asked that tough question is how do you make money is sometimes people are afraid to tell others how they're making money. But I don't think that's right. I think that, if people are going to use a product or service and it's valuable, then who cares if they're making money? But I'd still like to know how, right? Just because I'm curious on that. It's so funny is there's so many people that I'm really close with, even my mom and dad, they have no idea how Money Peach generates income. They're like, I don't get it. It's you send emails and then there's like a website and then you talk on this podcast thing. But it's all free. So how are you making money? And I tell them and they're just like, I don't get it. But I think it's still okay to tell people like, yes, we are a business. Like we make money and we're not ashamed of it because we're providing a ton of value or we wouldn't be in business.
Well, I think that's the key, right? Is you want us to make money as a user if you're finding value in us because otherwise we go away, right?
Absolutely. So, be careful because now somebody's going to be like, you know what? If I stop listening to Chris talk, he'll go away. Very cool. All right. So we're wrapping up the show here. I ask everybody that comes on the show, I'm going to ask you guys both a couple questions as we wrap up. These are just questions that I like. So I'm going to start with you, Sam. Sam, what are maybe one or two books that you would highly recommend?
So there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and it goes through it's about behavioral economics and about how we have all these sort of inherent biases that screw us up when we're trying to make important decisions. And for me, it was really interesting to see all the ways we're sort of wired to make sometimes the wrong decision. I thought that was a really interesting book. And if you're just looking for a light, fun read, there's nothing better than Harry Potter, in my opinion.
Well, which one? There's like 1,000 Harry Potter books, isn't there?
There are. The first one's always going to be hard to beat.
Okay. All right. So we'll put links to those two books in our show notes. Ramy, what about you?
So I have 3 young kids. So the only books I read now are Teeth Are Not for Biting and Hands Are Not for Hitting. But I do try to, I try to listen to podcasts on the way to work and back. And that's been interesting for me. And lately, of course, in addition to yours, has been some fintech podcasts. And I'm also a big fan of Gimlet's Startup.
So it's funny you mentioned Gimlet's Startup podcast. We had a college student on the show. He was a freshman in college, and he actually left school because he created an app that went crazy, got a bunch of investors to back it. And so, but his number one podcast he recommended was the one you just said, the Gimlet's Startup podcast. So it's twice now that I've heard that. So maybe I got to start looking into that. Sam, for you, what is the image on your home screen of your phone? What is the image?
The image is actually of one of my cats, Irene. She's a calico and incredibly cute.
Irene the calico. Very nice. And what about you, Ramy?
I'm boring. I have the default background.
You know what we're going to do, Ramy, is I need to go back and I need to scrape through all of our data on how many people we've interviewed that said they had the default image, and then see if there's some kind of correlation between them all to find out why that's happening. Because that's how my brain works. I'm like a data numbers driven guy. So I want to know, is there something going on in these people's brains that are, that I can learn from, that they have the default image? So, I don't have a cat, but I would have something like a cat on my phone if I had a cat, but I don't have a cat. So, all right. So moneypeach.com/HoneyFi. Check it out. It's free. You know that it's great because I told you it's great, but you also are going to be able to check it out yourself. Andrea and we've been playing around with it, and it's pretty cool stuff. I mean, it's basically what they've done is they've taken the stuff that's already going on in our heads about marriage, money, or relationships and money, and they put it in an app. And so I think it's really cool when I'm going through there and I'm like, yeah, I probably would have thought of that, or maybe I wouldn't have thought of that, but I'm glad you did think of that. So the way you're able to tag spending and, filter how many people or what you can and can't see, I think that's pretty creative. So especially if you're somebody who is just thinking about, making that switch to combining finances, I think this is the perfect app to get started. Or if you're somebody that's been, sharing money like my wife and I since day one, I think this is a way to just even improve that and get on the same page even more. So kudos to you guys for making something that is extremely valuable that's going to help a lot of people.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks.
And just like that, we wrap up another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. All the show notes, the links, anything that Sam or Ramy and I talked about can be found over at moneypeach.com/session83. That's moneypeach.com/session83. Special thanks goes out to my producer, Steve Stewart, and my assistant, Kayla Sloan. Without them, this show would not be possible. Stay tuned next week where I bring on special guest Aaron Chase, founder of $5 Dinners, where we talk about how to make over your grocery budget so you can eat every meal total for $5.
And so I started $5 Dinners after breaking down the prices of the food I was buying and putting it all together. And a couple nights in a row, it ended up being less than $5. At that time for my family of 4, but I could still pull it off most nights. You know what? I remember it so clearly. It was like the ticker on the news or runs across the screen. It was just like this little ticker across my brain, like $5 dinners, $5 dinners.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Boom,